The Eve Timer. A short story by PJ Leonard. Anthony ran through the empty train station, bag swinging from his hand. He swept around the corner and charged down the stairs, jumping down the last 5. He groaned as his knees ached in protest, but the light inside the train dazzled him. The doors were still open. He nearly flew at the train, but with a dreadful hissing noise, the doors rolled shut. Anthony slammed headfirst into the door and staggered back, stars popping in his eyes. He rubbed his head, growling under his breath. The sound of metal wheels rolling over metal rails filled his ears, and when he looked up, the train had already pulled out of the station, now just 2 red lights shrinking away into the night. Anthony swore under his breath and looked up at the billboard over the platform. It was completely blank, except for the date. December 24th. No more trains until Christmas morning. He threw his bag to the ground in anger, the sound of metal clanging through the empty station. Anthony hung up the phone and sighed, a plume of steam escaping from his mouth. His wife hadn't been angry, but that just made it worse. He didn't even ask if little Lucy was still awake. He knew what the answer was already. He looked around at the row of taxis. It was way too far to take a taxi home, and all the buses had stopped too. Even if he took the very first train in the morning, he still wouldn't be home until well after Lucy had woken up and opened all of her presents. He picked up his bag just as a light rain began to fall. Perfect. He headed down the hill, the sparkling lights of the city glowing hazily through the night and rain. Why did all the jobs have to be in the big city? He should have refused to take a job on Christmas Eve, but they needed the money. Just as the rain was beginning to get heavy, Anthony headed into a quiet-looking pub. He opened the door and stepped inside. Inside it wasn't quiet. It was utterly silent. Not a single other person was here on this cold and wet Christmas Eve night. And why would they be? They all had homes and families to go to. The only sound was the crackling and snapping of a fire near some big cushy seats. He walked up to the bar. The taps gleamed, sparkling with beads of moisture, and shelves of bottles behind the counter were stacked high, full of liquids of every colour. And no member of staff. Anthony cleared his throat loudly. Nothing. "Hello?" he called. "Anybody there?" Still no answer. Just as he was about to reach down to pick up his bag and leave, he heard a slam from the door behind the bar, followed by someone shouting angrily. Frowning, Anthony stood up and walked to the end of the bar so he could see through the door. Beyond was the kitchen, and standing in the middle was an old man wearing an apron. He frowned so deeply that the skin on his forehead seemed to fold over the edge of his big, thick glasses as he looked intently at something Anthony couldn't quite see. "Excuse me," Anthony called. "Are you okay in there?" The old man looked up. His eyes looked huge through those glasses. He shook his head as though shaking off a bad dream and walked up to the bar. "Yes," the old man croaked. Anthony looked up and down the bar. "Are you open? I just want to have a drink." "Ah!" The old man closed his eyes and rubbed his balding head. "I'm so sorry, sir. Yes, we are indeed open. I just... Well, you don't want to hear my troubles on Christmas Eve, do you? What can I get for you?" A minute later, Anthony sat at a bar with a cold pint of beer in his hand. He stared at the old man curiously as he polished the bar with a cloth, though his eyes kept wandering to the kitchen door. Is something wrong? Said Anthony, taking a sip of beer. The old man gave a bitter smile. Well, it's... No, it's nothing really. Anthony looked around the pub. They were the only people here. 2 men, alone on Christmas Eve, and neither of them were having a great time by the looks of it. At least I'm not alone, Anthony thought. I'll make you a deal, said Anthony, laying down his glass. I'll tell you my problems, and you tell me yours. Deal? The old man looked at Anthony carefully over the rim of his glasses. His smile grew warmer, and he nodded. Well, I'm an on-call mechanic, said Anthony, and I took a job here in the city today. Anthony stared into his glass as he relayed his story of how he missed the last train, how it was so far back to home, and how he would miss seeing his daughter opening her presents this year. Serves me right, I suppose, he said, picking up his beer. My wife told me that I shouldn't take this job in case it... Wait, you're a mechanic, you say? The old man interrupted. He leaned on a tap for support. Yeah, said Anthony slowly, feeling his heart sink. He knew where this was going. Sure enough, the old man's face lit up. Oh, how wonderful! That's the trouble I'm having, you see. Maybe you can help me. Anthony sighed. Work had got him into this mess in the first place. It was the last thing he wanted to think about right now, let alone do. Did this guy really want him to fix something for free? The old man seemed to read his mind, however, as he said, I'll give you a free bed for tonight, and breakfast in the morning if you can help me. How's that for a deal? Anthony sighed again. How could he refuse? He stood up, picked up his bag of tools, and followed the old man behind the bar and into the kitchen. It looked like a normal kitchen, with all the usual steel surfaces, big fridges and freezers, and a huge sink. There was one thing that was clearly out of place, though. A grandfather clock stood in the corner, completely silent. I just got it back from the repair shop today, said the old man, walking up to it. It was fine at first, but then it got slower and slower, and then it just stopped. Any ideas? Anthony nearly slipped on the laminate floor. Fixing a clock? That was exactly what he'd been doing today. What was it with clocks on Christmas Eve? Are you okay, sir? Said the old man, raising an eyebrow. Yes, said Anthony, a little too firmly. Let's take a look at it then. Anthony opened the glass door of the grandfather clock and pushed the pendulum aside. Instantly he saw the problem. The weights are the wrong way around, he said, rummaging around in his tool bag. The clock can't keep time properly. This shouldn't take too long to sort out. Oh, really? Said the old man. Why, thank you so much. I shall make sure you get the luxury suite tonight. After 10 minutes, the grandfather clock was ticking again, and the pendulum swinging back and forth. The old man clasped his hand in both of his. Thank you, kind sir, he said. This clock has been in my family for generations. If it broke now, I'd... Well, come let me get you another drink. It's on the house. They both sat by the log fire, talking and drinking. The old man told stories of his old pub and the things he'd seen inside its walls, while Anthony talked about his daughter. Lucy's going to hate me for this, he said. I'd promised her I'd be home. What kind of father am I, breaking my promise? The old man patted him on the knee. Don't beat yourself up, lad. You were doing what you thought was best. Here. He rummaged around in a pocket and pulled out a key. This is for the suite room upstairs. I'm off to bed now. The room is up the stairs, first door on the right. Get a good rest, and don't worry about waking me up for breakfast early in the morning. I understand that you'll want to get moving as soon as possible. Thank you, said Anthony as he took the key. He watched the old man disappear through an arch at the back of the pub, followed by the sound of creaking steps as he climbed upstairs. Anthony swirled the drink in his hand and looked at the clock on the mantelpiece. 1:15 a.m. Well, that clock seemed to be working fine. At the rate I'm working on fixing clocks, I'll be an expert in them soon. He watched the flames dancing in the fireplace, the heat beating on his face. He laid his drink on the table and sunk deeper into the soft chair. He closed his eyes and drifted away. When he awoke, the fire had gone out and the pub was dark. He groaned and stretched, the key to his room still in his hand. As comfortable as the chair was, he didn't want to waste a luxury room that he had worked to earn. He looked out of the window. Still dark. That didn't mean much. Winter was dark most of the time. He looked at the clock above the fireplace. 1:15 a.m. Wait, hadn't that been 1:15 a.m. before? There was no way he'd been asleep for just a minute, and that roaring fire had definitely not gone out 1 minute either. He stood up and staggered into the kitchen. He peered at the grandfather clock, its face illuminated by the light of the emergency exit sign. 1:15 a.m. Anthony pressed an ear to the clock. No ticking. It had stopped again. He walked back into the pub and listened for the sound of ticking from the clock on the mantelpiece. Nothing. All the clocks had stopped at the same time. What was going on? The door to the pub rattled and cold air rushed in. A shadow played across the wall as somebody very big walked in, coughing and sniffing from the cold. Anthony stepped behind the bar, hands shaking as he fumbled for the biggest, heaviest thing he could find. A man walked in, but not just any man. He was fat and wore a suit of red with white trimming. He brushed a glove through his big white beard. Santa Claus?
"Ah,"
said Santa.
"are you Anthony Parsons? I've been looking for you."
End of part 1.